The wind carried the smell of wood smoke long before Della Marsh saw the chimney, and she followed that smell the way a drowning woman follows the shoreline. She had been walking since dawn, her boots split at the seam, a canvas satchel banging against her hip with everything she owned folded inside it. 2 dresses, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a Bible with her mother's name written in the front cover. Her father's grave was 6 days behind her now, back in a town called Millhaven that she did not intend to see again. The debts had taken the house. The house had taken whatever was left of her girlhood. She was 23 years old, and she had not eaten since yesterday morning. The land here in the Montana high country was different from the flat scrub she'd crossed to get to it. Green where the creeks ran, gold where the grass had cured in the late summer sun. She stopped at a wild plum thicket, growing wild along a fence line, and picked what fruit she could reach, small and sour, the skin already softening toward rot. She ate 3 of them standing in the road, not caring how it looked, because pride was a luxury for women who had eaten breakfast. The fence itself told her something. It was good fence, cedar posts set deep and true, wire strung tight enough to sing if you plucked it. Someone here had money, or at least the discipline that so often stood in money's place. Della had grown up watching her father mistake the two, and she had learned to tell them apart the hard way. She heard the wagon before she saw it, the creak of a dry axle and the steady clop of a mule that had long since stopped hurrying for anyone. The man driving it pulled up when he was still 30 feet off and did not come any closer, as if he'd startled a deer and didn't want to lose it. He was younger than she expected a rancher to be, maybe 30, with a jaw that hadn't been shaved in 3 or 4 days and eyes the gray-green of sage after rain. He looked at her plum-stained fingers, at the satchel, at the road behind her that led from nowhere anyone would walk from on purpose. "You lost?" he asked. Not unkind, not particularly kind either. A man asking a plain question and expecting a plain answer. "No," Della said. "Just walking. Nobody walks this stretch just to walk it." He set the brake on the wagon, though he didn't climb down. "You headed to Bitter Creek?" "I hadn't decided." He considered that the way a man considers weather, without any hurry to reach a conclusion. Then he asked her the question that would turn out to matter more than either of them understood standing there in the road. "Can you keep books?" Della blinked. Of everything she had braced herself to hear from a stranger on a Montana road, a warning to move along, an offer of charity dressed up as kindness, the kind of attention a woman traveling alone had learned to fear, this was not among them. "I'm sorry? Ledgers. Figures. Can you keep them straight?" He said it like he was asking whether she could ride, or whether she could shoot. A simple inventory of a person's usefulness. "I kept my father's books for 9 years, she said, and heard the steel come back into her own voice as she said it. Before the bank took what he'd built and called it settling a debt, something shifted behind the man's eyes, quick and gone. "Then you're worth more to me than a hired man who can rope but can't add." He nodded toward the wagon bed. "Climb up. I'm not in the business of leaving people to walk when I've got a seat going spare." "I haven't agreed to anything." "No," he agreed. "But you haven't said no either, and there isn't another roof between here and Bitter Creek that I'd trust you to." He held out his hand, not to pull her up, just to steady her if she needed steadying. "Name's Wyatt Sorrell. I run cattle and I run them poorly, on account of I can't keep a straight column of numbers to save my life, and I've been swindled twice this year already because of it." She climbed up without taking the offered hand, because some things a woman kept for herself even when she was hungry, and Wyatt Sorrell did not remark on it. He simply clicked his tongue at the mule and they rode. The ranch house, when they reached it, was handsome from a distance and defeated up close. Good bones. Bad housekeeping, a wide porch with a railing coming loose at one corner, curtains yellowed with wood smoke, a dooryard scattered with the particular chaos of a household run by men who had better things to think about than order. Inside, the front room did double duty as an office, and the office had clearly lost the war against neglect. Papers were stacked on every surface in towers that leaned like drunks. A cigar box sat open on the desk, coins and folded bills, mixed carelessly with what looked like unpaid bills for feed and wire. "This is what nearly ruined me," Wyatt said, and there was no self-pity in it, only fact. "I know cattle. I know weather. I do not know why a column of threes won't add up the same way twice." Della set her satchel down by the door and looked at the wreck of the room the way another woman might have looked at a mess of dishes, not with despair, but with the particular hunger of someone who has finally found work suited to her hands. "Where do you keep your bank statements?" "Wherever they landed, I expect." "And your contracts with the buyers in Cheyenne?" "Somewhere in that pile, if the mice haven't got them." She turned to him, and for the first time since Millhaven, something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 6 days loosened, just slightly. "I'll need a clean table, good light, and you to stop touching anything on that desk until I've had a chance to understand what you've done to it." Wyatt almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am." That first evening, Della did not sort a single ledger. She simply cleared a corner of the table, lit a lamp, and sat with the cigar box until she had counted every coin and bill twice, writing the sum on a scrap of paper in a hand so neat it looked like it belonged to a schoolteacher. When Wyatt came in from the barn, smelling of horse and hay, he found her still bent over the desk, and a plate of cold biscuits and beans waiting for him that she'd made from what she found in his kitchen, because a woman raised right did not sit idle in another person's house while he worked. He ate standing at the counter, watching her write. "You didn't have to feed me. I didn't have anything better to do while I waited on you," she said, not looking up. And a man thinking clearly about cattle prices doesn't think as well on an empty stomach. He said nothing to that, but he noticed it, the way a man notices the first cool morning that tells him autumn is coming. The days that followed took on a shape neither of them had quite expected. Della rose before the sun and had the ledgers spread by lamplight before Wyatt had his boots on. She found, within the first week, that his hired hands, 4 of them, rough and skeptical of a woman handling the ranch's money, had been shorting him on tallies without meaning any particular harm by it, simply because nobody had ever checked their arithmetic. She found that the feed supplier in Bitter Creek had been rounding every invoice up in his own favor by $1 or $2, counting on nobody looking closely enough to notice. She found, buried under 3 months of unopened correspondence, a letter from a cattle broker in Helena offering better prices than the man Wyatt had been selling to out of habit alone. The hands warmed to her slowly, the way rough men warm to anyone who proves useful without making a show of it. She did not lecture them. She simply corrected the tallies, showed the foreman the error without shaming him for it, and let the work speak plainly for itself. Within a month, the household had a rhythm it hadn't had before: meals on time, accounts that balanced, a woman moving through rooms that had gone a long time without anyone caring whether they were clean. Wyatt began doing small things he could not entirely explain to himself. He fixed the loose porch railing without being asked. He rode the extra half hour into Bitter Creek to bring back a proper account book with a leather cover, because the one she'd been using was falling apart at the spine. He left a jar of wild honey on the kitchen table one morning, the comb still in it, and said only that he'd found the hive and thought she might want it for her biscuits. She said nothing about the honey. But that evening there was a spiced cake for dessert, made from the last of a bag of dried apples she'd found in the pantry, and when Wyatt took his first bite, he went very quiet for a moment, the way a man goes quiet when something tastes like a memory he didn't know he was missing. Their conversations stayed close to practical things: the weather, the price of beef, whether the roof would hold through another winter. But underneath the practical things, something else was building, slow and steady as a fire laid with patience. They were 2 people who had each been left to manage more than they should have had to manage alone, and each recognized in the other the particular relief of finally being matched with someone equally capable. One evening in late September, Wyatt came in long after dark, having stayed out to doctor a mare with a cut leg. The hands had eaten and gone to the bunkhouse. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock and the small sounds Della made mending a torn shirt by lamplight at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in. "There's stew on the stove," she said. He sat down heavily, and she brought him a bowl without being asked, and coffee besides, and he ate in a silence that had nothing uncomfortable in it. He watched her hands as she worked the needle, small and sure and never still. "You didn't have to wait up," he said. "A man ought to come home to something warm," she answered, not lifting her eyes from her mending, "even if it's only stew." He looked around the kitchen, which had become, without either of them quite deciding it, her domain, clean, ordered, smelling of bread and wood smoke instead of neglect. He looked at her, bent over her work in the lamplight, and something moved in his chest that he did not have a ready name for, something larger and steadier than simple gratitude. He had been alone on this ranch for 4 years, since a fever had taken his young wife the second winter after they married. He had told himself he was managing well enough. He saw now, watching Della thread a needle by lamplight, that managing and living were not the same thing, and he had only been doing the first. The trouble arrived on a gray afternoon in early October, in the shape of a black buggy far too clean for the ruts of the ranch road. The man who climbed down from it wore a city suit and a bowler hat, and he moved with the brisk self-importance of someone who had never once doubted his own authority. Wyatt met him on the porch, his face giving nothing away. "Mr. Sorrell." The man extended a gloved hand that Wyatt did not take. "Aldous Frayne, of the Helena Cattlemen's Trust. I believe we have some business to discuss." They sat at the long table, the same table where the hands took their meals, and Frayne spread a set of documents across it with the confidence of a man who had done this before and expected to win. Della, who had been in the kitchen shelling peas, came to the doorway at the sound of unfamiliar voices and stayed there, quiet, listening. "It's about the note you took last spring, Sorrell," Frayne said. "For the new bulls, due at the end of this month." "I'm well aware," Wyatt said. "Then you'll be aware the beef market's softened. Word from the rail yards is prices will drop further before the season turns. The trust is concerned about its exposure." Frayne's smile was the smile of a man delivering bad news he did not particularly regret. "We're prepared to offer a solution. We'll take the note off your hands at a discount, with the land standing as collateral. Saves everyone the unpleasantness of a formal default." It was, Della understood immediately, precisely the kind of arithmetic her father had once been too proud and too frightened to question, right up until it had cost him everything. She saw Wyatt's jaw tighten, saw his hands go still and flat against the table, a man holding his temper by main force. "I imagine you've handled cattle a long while, Mr. Sorrell." Frayne went on, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "But figures are a different trade altogether. Best to leave that to men who understand it." Della walked into the room before she had entirely decided to. She did not look to Wyatt for permission. The past month had taught them both that some things did not require asking. She went straight to the account book, the one Wyatt had ridden into town to buy her, and opened it to the current page. "This is a private matter, ma'am," Frayne said, with the particular irritation of a man being interrupted by someone he had not accounted for. Della ignored him and ran her finger down a column of figures. "You've tallied the note against 310 head for the fall drive," she said, her voice even, cutting cleanly through the room. "That's correct, isn't it, Wyatt?" "That's right. But you held the 18 calves from the North Range back from that count. The late-born ones, too small in the spring to send with the main herd." Wyatt frowned, following her now with the same careful attention he gave a shifting sky. "They weren't fit to sell in the spring. Wouldn't have brought a fair price." "No," Della agreed. "Not then." She looked up, first at Wyatt, then turned her gaze, calm and unhurried, on the banker. "But those 18 calves have had every scrap of skimmed milk and garden trimmings from this kitchen for 2 months running out on the good grass by the creek. I've walked out to look at them myself. They are not late-born runts any longer, Mr. Frayne. They are prime stock." A silence settled over the table. Frayne's confident smile thinned by a fraction. Della turned a page, picked up a pencil, and began to write, her hand as neat and certain as it had been the first night she'd counted his cigar box. "The going rate in Helena, before this drop you're so concerned about, is $38 a head for prime stock. 18 head comes to $684. Your note stands at $620. If a man rides them to the rail siding at Bitter Creek tomorrow, they can be loaded by Thursday. You'll have your payment in full, mister. Frayne, with $64 to spare for our trouble. She turned the book to face him, the figures plain and undeniable. I don't believe there's any need to discuss a discount. Frayne stared at the page, then at Della, his composure cracking at the edges into something like fury. He had ridden out expecting a rancher too proud or too ignorant to see the trap closing around him. He had not accounted for the woman behind the ledger. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers. The trust will expect payment on the date specified, Sorrell. The polish had gone entirely out of his voice. You'll have it, Wyatt said, rising as well, calm now where he had been coiled tight a minute before. He did not raise his voice. He simply held the banker's eyes until Frayne looked away first, and then the man was gone, his buggy rattling back down the ranch road faster than it had come. In the kitchen doorway, one of the hands let out a low whistle, and the others grinned at each other with something close to reverence. Wyatt did not look at them. He looked only at Della, who stood by the table with her hands folded in front of her apron, as composed as if she had just settled an argument over the price of eggs, rather than save the whole of his life's work with a column of figures and 18 calves nobody else had thought to count. He crossed the room toward her and found, standing that close, that he did not have words equal to what he wanted to say. The gratitude in him was too large for plain speech. He was seeing her, he realized, not as the woman he'd hired to keep his books straight, but as someone standing shoulder to shoulder with him, not behind him and not beneath him. She only gave him a small, quiet nod, and then turned back to her peas, as though she had not just outmaneuvered a banker from Helena in front of 4 ranch hands and won. That night Wyatt did not sleep well, though it was not worry that kept him awake. He lay listening to the wind pick up outside, turning over the whole shape of the day Frayne's smug arrival, the tight silence at the table, and then Della, calm and certain, laying out the truth of 18 calves like she was reading scripture. He understood, lying there, that he had been drifting for 4 years, keeping the ranch alive out of habit and stubbornness, without any real vision for what it might yet become. He had been surviving. He had not, until she came, been building anything. He rose before dawn to find the first snow of the season, lying soft and white over the yard, the world made clean and new overnight. He found Della on the back porch already, a shawl around her shoulders and a cup of coffee steaming in her hands, watching the snow with a stillness that suited her. It came early this year, she said, without turning. Sometimes it does. He came to stand beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke, content simply to share the hush of the new morning. Then he found that the time for his usual carefulness had passed. I'm not a man with a great many words, Della, he began, his voice steady. I see cattle and fence lines clear enough, but I near lost everything yesterday because I couldn't see past my own pride to what was standing right in front of me. He turned to face her fully. You saved this ranch. Not only yesterday, you've been saving it since the day I found you on that road. This house was just a building before you came into it. Now it's a home, and I don't much care to go back to what it was before. He drew a breath, gathering the last of his nerve. The season's turning, the note's paid. There's no more reason for you to stay on, if staying isn't what you want. But I find I'm not willing to let you go. I'd like you to stay through the winter and every winter after, Della, as my wife. The porch went quiet, save for the soft hush of falling snow. Della's expression did not change all at once, but a warmth crept into her eyes that chased the last of the old grief out of them. She took a slow sip of her coffee, considering him the way she considered any proposal placed in front of her carefully and without hurry. I was wondering when you'd find your way to asking, she said at last, a smile touching her mouth. You're a good man, Wyatt Sorrell, just terribly slow about the things that matter most. The relief that went through him was strong enough to weaken his knees. I expect that's fair, he admitted, and grinned, wide and unguarded, in a way none of his hands had ever once seen him grin. Their courtship, once begun, was as plain and solid as the two of them. No grand declarations, no flowers picked for show. They rode the fence lines together in the mornings, Della handling a horse with an ease that surprised no one who'd watched her handle a ledger. In the evenings, they went over the accounts side by side, planning the spring calving, and she taught him to make a pie crust that didn't fall apart at the seams, and he taught her to read A Coming Storm by the color of the western sky. They married in November, on a cold, bright Saturday, in front of the Justice of the Peace in Bitter Creek. Della wore a gray wool dress she'd sewn herself in the evenings after the ledgers were closed. Wyatt wore his one good suit, brushed and pressed by hands that hadn't held a needle in years but had tried anyway. The hands stood up as witnesses, hats crushed in their fists, grinning like fools. Afterward, there was a wedding supper back at the ranch, roast beef and potatoes and 3 kinds of pie, all of it Della's doing, because some things a woman did not hand off even on her own wedding day. That night, standing on the porch with the snow gleaming blue under a sky thick with stars, Wyatt took her hand, and her fingers folded into his like they had always belonged there. "Welcome home, Della," he said. "I've been home a while now," she answered. "I just didn't have the word for it until you gave it to me." 5 years on, the light came down long and gold over the Montana hills, painting the grass the color of old coins. Wyatt sat on the porch swing, its chain creaking soft and familiar. The ranch behind him fat and prosperous. Fences mended, herds strong. Della came out and settled beside him, handing him his coffee, moving with the same unhurried grace she always had, though the hard years had long since smoothed out of her face, replaced now with the quiet ease of a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. A small girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's sage-green eyes came tearing around the corner of the porch, chasing a barn cat that wanted no part of being chased, and tumbled into the dirt with a thump that would have made most children wail. Instead, she sat up, inspected her scraped palms with fierce concentration, and marched back after the cat without a single tear. "Got your stubbornness," Wyatt said, pride thick in his voice. "And your slowness to give up on a thing," Della said, eyes bright. Took her a full minute to decide the cat was worth chasing again. Wyatt laughed, low and easy, and slid his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she'd learned to over 5 winters of practice. They sat together and watched their daughter give up on the cat entirely in favor of a beetle, the sun sliding low behind the western ridge, the air turning cool with the smell of cut hay drifting up from the lower fields. "Do you ever think on that banker?" Wyatt asked, quiet. "Frayne. I think on him plenty," Della said. He believed a ledger was only ever about numbers. Never understood it was about seeing what was really there. "And the 18 calves. And the 18 calves?" she agreed, smiling into her coffee. He tightened his arm around her and thought, not for the first time, of the woman he'd found starving on a dusty road with plum juice staining her fingers, and the woman beside him now, the center around which the whole of his life had quietly rearranged itself. He had been a slow man, he knew it well, slow to see what was standing directly in front of him. But he had gotten there in the end, just barely in time, and he had never once regretted the asking. Sometimes the thing that saves us isn't luck or rescue, but the quiet skill we've carried all along, waiting for someone to finally ask what we're capable of. Della didn't need saving, she needed a chance. So take stock of what you already know how to do, even the ordinary parts, because somewhere down the road, that overlooked gift might be exactly what turns a stranger's whole life around. A small note for you, friend. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for your entertainment, though we hope its gentle life lesson still found its way into your heart.